Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 30th of July of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Kiev once again, because very interesting details we got today from the city of Kiev and about things that Zelensky are planning to do in the very near future. So this is the first article that was stated today by the foreign minister spokesman Tichy. He said that Zelensky is preparing about 20 decrees on both dismissal and appointment of Ukrainian ambassadors. They plan to update the heads of embassies in G7 and G20 countries. So this is a very important statement, and we will discuss this just in a minute. Another important statement also about the same situation. Zelensky promised quick changes in defense leadership after meeting with Umerov. Ukraine needs positive dynamics in relations with the United States and new steps in defense management. The relevant decisions will be announced in the near future, Zelensky said. So as you can see, according to these different articles, Zelensky is going to make changes in the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, and he is going to make changes in the foreign ministry by replacing 20 ambassadors in G7 and G20 countries, so the most powerful and the richest countries in the world. So you may ask, so what is so specific and special with this decision? The thing is that I would like to remind you that after the special military operation started in 2022, probably 20 million of Ukrainians left Ukraine. Some of them left in the direction of Russia and in the direction of Belarus, so in former Soviet countries. But we are talking about probably 5 or 6 or maybe 7 millions, not more. And around 15 millions left Ukraine in the western direction. We're talking about Poland, Germany, France, United Kingdom, Italy. We're talking about Norway, Sweden. We are talking about Spain, the United States of America, and Canada. So basically, summarizing everything, we're talking about G7 and G20 countries. So you may say, so what is the connection between the people who left Ukraine after the beginning of the special military operation and these countries and the ambassadors? And the thing is that Zelensky is preparing himself before the beginning of elections. And according to this decision, most likely the elections of President of Ukraine are going to take place in 2025. So what is the connection between Zelensky, elections, ambassadors, and so on? The thing is that the normal election process means that every single person in Ukraine needs to come, let's say, to some government office. This might be school, this might be college, this might be another building where this or that citizen of Ukraine can vote for his president, for person he is elected, he chose as a president of Ukraine. And this situation works only when talking about Ukraine itself. Furthermore, it works just when we talk about cities like Lvov, Kiev, when talking about cities that are very far from the line of combat contact. But when talking about the rest of Ukrainians, I'm talking about 15 millions of those who left Ukraine in the western direction, who are currently located in France, United Kingdom, Germany, Poland, and Italy, and so on. They can vote for the next president only on the territories of embassies. Embassies, maybe other buildings that belongs to embassies, and so on. So the main point is that this election process will be under control of ambassador of the country. For example, Ukrainians can vote maybe on the territory when talking about Germany and Berlin, maybe Munich, maybe other settlements, but all these buildings will be under complete control of an ambassador of Ukraine on the territory of Germany. Not the German authorities will control the elections of Ukrainian president, but Ukrainians themselves. So, which means that Zelensky, right before the beginning of the president election, are trying to change the ambassadors in every single country, mainly in those countries where have and homed significant number of Ukrainians, millions, to be sure and to control the entire voting and election process. Another important thing, I would like to remind you that, as we discussed, around maybe 5, maybe 7, maybe 4 millions of Ukrainians left in the direction of Russia. But I would like to remind you We discussed the situation 2 or 3 weeks ago or months ago that Ukraine parliament adopted a law that allows the Ukrainians to cancel the citizenship of those Ukrainians who support Russia or who lives on the territory of Russia or who serves in the Russian army or who basically left Ukraine in the eastern direction. So most likely these people will not take part in the present election process of late 2025 or early 2026. Okay, it's clear about Russia, about citizenship of Ukrainians there. It's clear about ambassadors and what are they going to do on the territory of these European countries. What is their main purpose? And the question is what Zelensky is going to do with the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. And the answer to this question is also very simple. The president election process, because we need to understand that very likely the war between Russia and Ukraine will not be finished by the time Zelensky will launch the present elections. The war will ongoing. This is going to be an ongoing process. So that is why sometimes, and in most of the cases, the soldiers on the ground will vote for a president basically in trenches and strongholds under the fire of Russian artillery and FPV drones. So it is also very important to be 100% sure that elections will go as it was scheduled, not just scheduled, and as much as closer to Zelensky favor. Furthermore, Minister of Defense is the only minister that knows the exact losses of Ukrainians along the line of combat contact. Zelensky says that Ukrainians lost 40,000 soldiers, but the Russians are saying that Ukrainians lost more than 1 million soldiers. So who is going to how these voices, how these peoples, how this gap between, let's say, real losses and losses that were provided by the Minister of Defense will, involve, and what kind of role they will play in this election process. And obviously Zelensky, by replacements in the Minister of Defense, is trying to fix this issue also, and obviously in his favor. So all these signals tell me that most likely Ukraine is going to probably run this process, to start this process this year. We're talking about present elections, and Zelensky is doing everything he can with the purpose to control the entire process on the territory of Russia, along the line of combat contact, on the territory of Ukraine, and on the territory of the G7 and G20 countries. So this is the situation, and this is Zelensky as is. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, because during the previous 24 hours we had lots of very interesting updates, and so let's start. And first let's talk about the most important update that is coming from the South Donetsk or the Dnipropetrovsk direction. As you can see, we have adjusted the map. We have lots of icons above the settlement of Mirne. The Russians today published this video. The Russians call this settlement of Karla Marx, and the Ukrainians are calling this village of Mirne. So because we have gap between Soviet names of villages in Ukraine and let's say fresh or modern Ukraine titles. Anyway, the village was taken by the Russians, and we have a video about this. And in this video we can see how the Russians were taking this village under complete control. First there was artillery preparation, then the Russians began working with drones. They began clearing the territory, and then the Russians sent infantry to secure the village itself. So lots of episodes, the very big video, and in the final part of this video we can see lots of episodes how Russian soldiers raised Russian flags all over the entire territory of the settlement. At least 4 flags were geolocated. One of the flags was established in the southern part, another one in the western part, another one in the central part, and another one in the northern part of the settlement. Based on this video we have adjusted the map, as many mappers adjusted their own maps. So this is the situation, for example, in the area of the village of Mirne. By the end of the 12th of July of 2025, the Russians managed to take this village already, to secure the territories around, and just today, by the end of the 30th of July, we got geolocation that completely confirmed Russian control over this territory. So the village was taken, and the Russians continue advancing further in the western and the northwestern directions. As for the end of the 30th of July of 2025, 2025, the heaviest clashes are taking place for the village of Voskresenka. The Russians managed to get for as close as possible to the settlement from the south and from the east. We expect that during the next several days, we are going to receive first updates of the village itself provided by, let's say, neutral or reliable resources. Furthermore, the Russians continue their pressure in the northern direction. Currently, there are very heavy clashes for the settlements of Zelený Gai, for the village of Novokhatskaya, and for the settlement of Grushevka. So when talking about these two last villages, according to information we have, by the end of 30th of July, the Russians managed to secure this territory completely. So probably and most likely tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm this information as well. So as this is for this direction, also we got very interesting updates from the settlement of Malinovka. Very reliable resource reported that these upcoming days, we should expect additional updates about the settlement, and he told us that most likely the Russians establish complete control over this territory of the settlement, and probably during the next week we will adjust this territory completely in Russian favor. So this is another breakthrough of the armored forces of the Russian Federation, this time to the east of the city of Guliai-Polye. So as we can see, and according to geolocations and according to different updates, currently this is the worst direction for the armored forces of Ukraine. They're losing the ground very fast, and the Russians, most important, intensifies their offensive operation, and the Russians are trying to move faster and faster and faster. And according to all geolocation, according to all updates, we see that the Russians are moving in the northwestern direction, and the Russians most likely are going to establish complete control over the settlements of Guliai-Polye and Pokrovskaya, and they will try to get as deep as possible on the territory of Ukraine, trying to ruin Ukrainian logistics and to ruin Ukrainian defense. So it seems that this is the breakthrough area, and this is exactly the point which can lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian defense, not just in the South Donetsk or Dnipropetrovsk direction, but this collapse can lead to total collapse of the entire line of combat contact. Now let's talk about the settlement of Pokrovsk agglomeration, and the city of Novoekonomichne as a part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, its northeastern and eastern flank. We have changes as well. As you can see, we have already discussed the situation during the previous video, and I would like to remind you that according to very reliable pro-Russian resources, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to break through Ukrainian defense to the north of the settlement, to outflank the city of Novoekonomichne from the north, and to establish control over the northwestern part of this, let's say, settlement. This is very important progress. The Russians managed to block Novoekonomichne now from at least several directions, from the northwest, north, northeast, east, southeast, and the south. Ukrainians have just several roads for evacuation through this mine of Komsomolska. This is the focal point of Ukrainian defense. If Ukrainians lose control of this mine, they will lose the entire city. But as for now, there are very heavy clashes. And we discussed this progress on the ground during the previous video, and during the day, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation made another statement. The Russians are saying that as a result of offensive actions, units of the Group of Forces Center managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Nikolaevka in the Donetsk People's Republic. So based on this report, most of the mappers, pro-Russian mappers, neutral mappers, adjusted their maps by coloring this village of Nikolaevka under complete Russian control. As for the end of the 30th of July of 2025, we still haven't received even a single video that can confirm Russian control over this territory. Know that this is very important, because despite the fact that most of the military experts color their maps in this area, this is not the only Nikolaevka in the Pokrovsk agglomeration. For example, this is the first Nikolaevka, the Nikolaevka that was colored by most of the mappers, but there is another Nikolaevka to the south of this area, to the south of the settlement of Mirnograd. This is it. And you know that we colored this area, as you can see, because we had geolocations in the past that confirmed Russian control over this territory. But correct me if I'm wrong, but the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation yet haven't reported complete control over this territory, or as the Russians say, liberating of this area. So which means that maybe the Russians secured this area, but not this one. So as for now, we are waiting for additional reports or updates from the Minister of Defense, from maybe somebody will publish a video where we could see Russian progress or Russian strong control over this or that Nikolaevka, and then it will be clear what exactly the Russians managed to secure. As for now, we are going to keep the map as is, but we will keep this information on our minds that maybe this is the wrong Nikolaevka that was colored. Maybe the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation were talking about this Nikolaevka. To understand this, we need additional days, weeks, and then obviously it will become clear. But when talking about the logic of the special military operation and the logic of battles that are currently taking place along the entire line of combat contact, most likely the Russians managed to secure this one, because as we discussed, currently there are very heavy clashes for the settlement, and maybe this is the situation. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinovka direction, where the Russians managed to improve their positions in the area of the Sherbinovka and Novospaskaya. This is the road where the Russians began their offensive operation. Currently, the Russians are trying to tighten the noose around the settlement of Sherbinovka, and according to information we have, the Russians were pretty successful. So we expect that very heavy clashes, fierce clashes are going to take place for this area, and it seems that the Russians are tasked to cut this pocket completely. Ukrainians most likely will suffer huge losses due to the configuration of the front line. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. As for now, we have some changes in the Zabalka, or in the western part of the city of Donetsk. So several, let's say, blocks, tree lines were colored in Russian favor. Based on the report of pro-Ukrainian resources, we colored these territories Russian control, because before this we had reports that these territories were under complete Ukrainian control without proofs. So basically we restored Russian control with this territory as it used to be 2 or 3 months ago. So there are very heavy clashes. We're waiting for additional updates. As for the Kupiansk direction, the most interesting updates are coming from the northern part. The Russians, according to information we have, managed to improve their positions in the area of the village of Kamenka. So the Russians, as we can see, intensified their offensive operation. These changes were made by pro-Ukrainian resources. They adjusted this huge forest in Russian favor to the west of Kamenka, but this is not the only area that the Russians secured during the previous 24 hours. According to many sources, the Russians improved their positions in the most northeastern part of Kharkiv Oblast by taking under control the village of Degtyarne. Several pro-Russian resources have already colored this small pocket. Some pro-Russian resources reported that there are very heavy clashes for the territory of the settlement, and that by the morning of the 30th of July this village was about to secure it. So most likely during the next several days the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm Russian control over this territory, and this is going to be a 4 points of pressure in the northeastern part of Kharkiv Oblast. The first points of pressure take place in the area of Volchansk, where the Russians are trying to finish the battle for the city. The second point of pressure is the newly created front line in the area of Degtyarne. The third point of pressure is the Russian offensive operation in the direction of Milovoy, and the fourth point of pressure is the area in the vicinity of Kamenka. So from these 4 directions, the Russians are trying to attack in this area with the purpose to establish complete control over these pockets between the city of Kupiansk and Pechenegi water reservoir and the city of Volchansk. This is the primary target for the Russians. It obviously will take time for the Russians to secure this territory, but the Russians are doing everything they can with the purpose to achieve this result. As for the Sumsky direction, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions in the southern part of Yunakivka. So we start receiving first changes. Several days ago, I would like to remind you some pro-Russian resources report about Russian control over the southern part that Ukrainians abandoned their positions. Later, Ukrainians reported that they still control the southern part, and today first mappers from pro-Russian resources began adjusting their maps. So it seems that during the next several days, the Russians will finish the battle for this territory, and Ukrainians will be forced to fall back completely to the second defense layer. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.